Shalom Aleichem. We're up to Pasha's Boy, Tovshin Pei Daled. It's Hashem, B'Shah Tova. We are now, as you know, 3 months already into the war from Gaza, and we're faced with multiple casualties which we see coming out of the war from Gaza. But the hostages are in our mind all the time. We keep on davening all the time. The cholim which are in Klal Yisrael, people which are injured, which are maimed, la'aleinu for life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send them all a refuah shalema. The Ammonis and the Yisayimim, the Avelim in Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should me'oider them, support them and give them great support. And of course, uppermost in our mind is also Chayalim, the soldiers who are standing our Mishma HaGavum. Hinei lo yonun v'lo yishon shomei Yisrael. We ourselves, we are like bystanders, standing at the side and watching all this going on, and we realize the situation which we are in is quite different from those who are facing the hostages and the soldiers which are on the front. I mean in the following way. We asked ourselves as bystanders, what can we do? What is the greatest possible momentum? What is the greatest initiative which perhaps we can take in these times? And I think it really is one thing, and that is the koach of Tefilla. To daven for the people who are involved, the hostages, to daven for the soldiers, to daven for the people who are out of their homes. Surely the main mitzvah which we have, the main avodah, maybe some people can go down to Gaza. Some of my friends are going down and helping. But for most of us who are removed, we are bystanders. For sure, the main avodah, the main situation which we're in is to daven for all these people. I was thinking from the last shir that we mentioned, that when Klal Yisrael came to Har Sinai, at the Mount Sinai, and they received the Torah, there were two descriptions which were given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael. The first, they should be a Goy Kodosh, a holy nation. A holy nation means their relationship between man and the Almighty. And Mamleches Kohanim, which is a congregation of Kohanim, of priests. And we explained in the words of the Netziv, in his commentary on the Torah, in Hamek Dova, the Netziv explains it means refined people, B'nai Efrat, people who care, people who show ichpatiot, interest, who are noiseh ba'ol, who carry the burden of the rest of Klal Yisrael. Achenu b'nei Yisrael hanasunim b'tzara u'v'shivya. Meaning, in reality, if you think about it, the power of Tefillah really covers both of those. Surely, when one davens to the Almighty, you make a connection bein Adam lamokim. You're talking to the Almighty. But of course, davening for somebody else is also a tremendous mitzvah of Mamleches Kohanim. And therefore, perhaps the mitzvah of Tefillah covers both of these ranges, both the profile of Goy Kodesh and also Mamleches Kohanim, to show care, to show ichpatiot, to show interest in people, what's going on with people in Klal Yisrael. Under those circumstances, I thought that maybe we would have 3 shiurim on Tefillah. The first one, which is this one, which will show in Mitzvah Hashem how Tefillah is like the catalyst of the Geula in the times of the days before the Mashiach, to make the change from the times of Olam Hazeh into the times of the Mashiach. Tefillah really is a catalyst which causes the change. That is the theme of this shir. The next shir in Mitzvah Hashem will show the importance of how to react, that how Tefillah shows a tremendous reaction that we have, that we don't just listen to something, that we react, we care, we have ichpatiut. And the third shir, which I would like to give on the basis of Tefillah, because as I mentioned, I think Tefillah is really our main mitzvah, our main responsibility which we have, bein Adam lamokim, between man and the Almighty, and between man and his fellow man, is to daven, is the perfection of Tefillah which comes out. A person can grow tremendously in his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and also with his fellow man by davening for people. Those are 3 shiurim. This one in Mitzvah Hashem is called the catalyst, how Tefillah can act as a change and causes a change in society from the world in which we live in to the world which in Mitzvah Hashem we hope to go into in the days of Mashiach. I must mention at the outset that perhaps many of the points which might come out you might have heard before in previous shiurim, but that doesn't matter, because I believe that the points which I'm raising are something like the survival kit, the spiritual survival kit that you have to go through these days of tremendous confusion and turmoil in order to come into the days of Mashiach. I think this is something like the jugular. This is the lifeline that we have. The power of Tefillah which we have. If you remember, we mentioned a shir at the beginning of this series, the beginning of the winter, Isn't that what David HaMelech said for the times of the Golus of Mishmo, which we're going to? Ezreinu b'shem Hashem. Our help comes from the Almighty. Perek 124 in Tefillim. Oiseh Shamayim v'Oretz. And the first thing is the power of prayer. Ezreinu b'shem Hashem, to daven to the Almighty. We must daven for the hostages. We must daven for the soldiers. We must daven for the people who are sick and the Avelim. And that is surely our mitzvah which we have on ourselves. There might be points of repetition which you've heard before, but never mind. I think it's important to mention these points, and I hope you'll pick up a theme from the beginning of the shir all the way through to the end, as you'll see. Let's start with the opening chapter of the beautiful sefer written by Pinchas, called Sha'arim B'Tefilla. And Rabbi Pinchas writes in the beginning, in the introduction there, a beautiful comment which was made by Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital was the main Talmud of the Arizal. Reb Chaim Vital mentioned as follows: in the earlier generations, in the time of the Rishonim, the main mitzvah which was given is the mitzvah of torah. Torah was their kviyas, Torah was their lifeline, and they survived and they lived, and the main occupation of people, main vocation, the main mitzvah was the koyach of Torah. But then, surprisingly, Reb Chaim Vital says, in these times, in the times of Iksa to Mashiach, the times of the days before the Mashiach, the main mitzvah turns out to be the mitzvah of Tefilla, of the avodah of praying to Hashem. And maybe that's why we're on target. We have what's called finger on the pulse, what I mentioned before. If Chaim Vital said that's our main avodah, is to daven to the Almighty, the situation should change. We should daven for everybody. Achenu b'nei Yisrael, hanasulim batzorah v'ashivya. If Rabbi Chaim Vital says that, maybe we can ask a question. But surely we said every single morning in davening, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Torah is really the preeminent, the most important mitzvah is Torah. So why do he say that Tefillah becomes the most important mitzvah? Surely Talmud Torah is far more important than Tefillah. If we're going to find merit and we're going to find a certain appeasement with the Almighty, surely Talmud Torah is even greater than Tefillah. But Pinchas explained in the following way, in a beautiful way. If you look at the beginning of Sha'arim Tefillah, he says in the following way. Let's say a person on Rosh Hashanah decides for the whole of the day of Rosh Hashanah he's going to spend his time learning Torah, and he doesn't listen to the shofar. What happens then? Well, maybe the mitzvah is certainly greater. Talmud Torah is greater than Shkiyah Shofar. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. So surely the mitzvah of learning Torah on Rosh Hashanah is far greater. The answer is no. He missed the mitzvah of the day. His finger isn't on the pulse. The mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah is to listen to the shofar. We could also say perhaps his Torah isn't worthwhile, because if the Torah tells us on Rosh Hashanah to listen to the shofar, then even though he's sitting and learning, the actual mitzvah itself maybe is certainly the most profound and the most important and the most preeminent of mitzvahs. But he missed the day. He missed the point. He's not on target. He's not hitting bullseye. He hasn't got finger on the pulse. The mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah is listen to the shofar. And maybe his Torah isn't worthwhile. Perhaps we can say the same thing also by Leil HaSeder. It comes to the night of Leil HaSeder, and the person, instead of sitting and reading the Haggadah or eating his matzah, he sits and learns Torah. Yes, you're right. The mitzvah of Torah is far greater, but he's missing the point. The point is that the Torah obligates him to read the Haggadah, Sipu Yotzias Mitzrayim, and to eat his matzah. You're right. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah is much greater, but you're missing the mitzvah of the day, and that's the point here. And therefore, says Rabbi Pinchas in the following way, the meaning behind Rabbi Chaim Vital is quite straightforward. You're right. Talmud Torah is far greater. But in these times, you have something which is topical, which is relevant, which is the mitzvahs hayom. The mitzvahs hayom, the mitzvah of the day that we're into is the mitzvah of tefillah. And therefore, that's the reason why I think I'm suggesting at the beginning that the catalyst, the main important point which we have in our times is the mitzvah of tefillah. Even though Talmud Torah is keneged kulam, but in order to find favor in the eyes of the Almighty, which I hope you will realize at the end of this year, the greatest possible approach that we can have is the momentum which we have behind tefillah, behind prayer. Maybe that's the reason that we say in Shir Hamas, B'shuv Hashem, Oz Yomu V'agim Higdal, B'shuv Hashem, Noisei Alu Moise, B'rina, B'shuv Hashem, we will come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oz Yom, B'rina Yitzayru, Noisei Alu Moise, B'rina Yitzayru, we will come with our winner, meaning, B'shuv Hashem, Hashiv, Etzon, Hayinu Kachovim, Hayinu Samechim, the chapter says, we will come with tefillah. Our tefillah will be what causes it. B'rina Yitzayru, which is the part of the Gula which we're expecting, the Gula Shlema. The Koyach of Tefillah is the greatest point here. What we must do, though, perhaps, is in order to appreciate this point, is to ask ourselves, Why is it that Tefilla is a preeminent? Why not another mitzvah? Why isn't it another mitzvah? Why not chesed? Why not tzedakah? Why not any other mitzvah which we can perhaps do? Why is Tefilla the most important mitzvah in these times? And the answer is as follows. In order to move over, to make this enormous change from the society as we know it in the times of the Olam Hazeh into the times of the Mashiach, we have to understand what is the nature of the change which is going on. And it's an enormous change in society. The change will be phenomenal from night to day, from black to white. Enormous difference between the times that we live in and the times of the Mashiach in the following way. What is the nature of the society that we live in our times? I would suggest, I was thinking of a phrase. It's something like a cauldron of human hegemony, meaning it's a boiling pot. Everything boils and agitated towards one thing, human hegemony, the prestige and the power of man. Isn't that really the society that we live in? How important a person is, how much money he makes, his pocket and his prestige is the most important point. Meaning, what does he is? Who is the person? The status of a human being is really the most important point. Money, money, money makes the world go around. Though, isn't that the point in the point that we're living in? The society that we live in. Really, all Western civilization is really based on that point, no? Based on the point of prestige and money, and that's really what the society that we live in. Olam Hazeh, as we know it, really is the basis of the rise and the importance of a human being, how much money he can make, how important he is, his covet, his prime and his status in society. As far as the Almighty is concerned, he's really pushed aside, as we see in the times that we are. The Almighty is mentioned, not so much in a Torah society, but certainly in the world that we know it. The Almighty is mentioned maybe at a bedside of somebody who's dying, or someone at a grave. You mention the name of the Almighty, or maybe in a banknote. No, in God we trust. But I hope no one picks up a banknote and gives it a kiss. A bit lamaisa. It's a banknote. No, it's a bank. In God we trust. But it's very quiet. No one mentions it. The Almighty is really out of the scene, and the world that we live in Olam Hazeh, the present society, is really based on materialism and secular values. That's the world that we see it. But what will happen in the times of the Mashiach? There'll be an enormous change. The change will be B'hoya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu yiheh Hashem echad u'shemay echad. Meaning, the most important and the significant rise and the change in society will be that people will value the nature of Yiras Shamayim, of fearing the Almighty and recognizing the Almighty. Isn't that what we're saying in all our prayers all the time? Hashem melech al kol haaretz. Meaning, the status and the recognition and the prominence of the Borei Olam will completely change, and he will become right to the forefront. There is a sentence which the Navi Yeshaya in Perek chapter 11 in Isaiah, I think it's Posuk Tes, he brings as follows, an interesting Posuk which really describes the scene as, the lion lying down with the lamb, and the child will play at the mouth of a serpent, all the different scenes of which will happen in the time. And then the Posuk says, Kimala ha'aretz deya es Hashem, kamayim leyam lechasim. The change will be that all of the world will be filled of recognition of knowledge of the Almighty, like the water covers the sea. What does it mean, kamayim liyam lechasim? Meaning, at the moment, everything has what's called a covering of materialism. How much is the man worth? How much is the house worth? How much is the building? How much is a person's empire? How much is his company worth? Everything has a covering of materialism. What will change is, kamayim liyam lechasim. All you look at the water is the water. The water covers everything. I mean, everything has a covering of materialism nowadays. What will happen in the future is, the day of Hashem, the knowledge of the Almighty, will have the covering. How much Torah does a person have? How much knowledge of the Almighty does a person have? And that's an enormous change in society. That's a phenomenal change. I was thinking maybe we can look at that moshel of the Pasuk in Yishak, of the water covers the sea in the following way. If you look out at a stretch of water, you look out over a lake or you look over the sea, all you see is above the surface. What's above the surface? Above the surface is only what's noticeable. Underneath you don't see anything. The bedrock and the fish and the life underwater you don't see because it's all covered. Everything is covered with the water. What will happen? What is it in our times at the moment? You only see above the surface. You don't see what's underneath. What's underneath the surface in our times? Spiritual values, the Almighty. It's all under the water. Maybe that's what the Navi means. Under the water level is all levels of spiritual times. What will happen now is it will shift. Above the surface will be the nature of a Talmid Chacham, the level of how much Torah, how much mitzvahs, how much fear of the Almighty there is. That will rise above the surface. And materialism will go underneath the surface. That's the change that will happen. The difference between the times that we live in and the times of the Mashiach, Kamayim liyam lechasim, as you look over the water, what you see is only above the water. At the moment, under the water are all spiritual values. They become unimportant. They're not so relevant in our times. It'll shift in that way. And what will rise above the surface will be the nature of how much Torah, how much recognition of the Melech HaKol Horetz, how much a person recognizes the Almighty. That's an enormous change, Rabbi say, in society and in values. It's by no means something natural. The change by no means will just happen naturally in a certain way. For example, at the end of the day, the sun sets, and the natural reaction is, the natural behavior is, day turns into night, and that's the natural reaction. Winter turns into spring. That's a natural situation. That's a natural change. People grow older. Their hair grows grey, and people become older. That's a natural change. But the change from Olam Hazeh into the times of the Mashiach is completely unnatural. And therefore, we need something which will cause this change. And that's really what Pinchas is mentioning here. The relevance of prayer in our times, in the times that we're going through, the times of great turmoil and chaos that we're going through, what will bring about this change? It won't be natural. It won't be as natural as a person grows up and becomes older. It won't be as natural as when day ends and night comes. It won't be as natural as the seasons. It'll be something completely unnatural. And therefore, we have to look to the catalyst which will cause that. And that is what Rabbi Chaim Volozhin means when he says that the mitzvah of the days of the Ikvus Mashiach will become the power of prayer. That is the catalyst. You need something which is totally unnatural, meaning the relationship which we have between man and the Almighty. That is the power which will cause the change. We have to understand it. What does it mean, the power of Tefillah? What is the power of Tefillah? What is the nature of the Siddur? I'd like to read out to you the passage from the Bir Halacha, which the Chofetz Chaim writes in Siman Kuf Aleph, and a little bit of information and background depth. What is behind the Siddur that we have? And these are the words of the Chofetz Chaim in Siman Kuf Aleph. Listen to these words. When the men of the Great Assembly, which was after the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the men of the Great Assembly sat down, Hayu Kuf Kaf Zakenim. There were 120 of the most eminent and greatest Talmidei Chachomim in Klal Yisrael. Umehem Kama Neviim, and some of them were prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, Mordechai. These were people who were inside the Knesset Hagdolah. Some of them were Neviim, were prophets. Behema Nimnu, and they sat down and debated in order to write the text of the Siddur that we have. And they discussed Al Kol Bracha, every single bracha that we have. B'tei Boisecha, with the words, Utei Rufeis Oisiesecha, and the linking of letters from one letter to the next. Bekama Soidos Ne'elamos Nisgovos, with certain unbelievable secrets which we will not understand, which we will not fathom out. These 120 Zakenim sat down and discussed, meaning you must say, Shema Koilenu. You cannot say Tishma Hashem lekol shalanu. That's not what's written in the Siddur. The Siddur says Shema Koleinu. The words that they said and the letters that they chose were all discussed and debated by these 120 elders. And when we say these words, when we use the words of the Siddur, we use the Nusach and the text of the Siddur which we use. We don't know all the intentions which we have. How can we possibly know the intentions and the devotion and the mind which set behind these great Tad Tzadikim? Nevertheless, our prayer arrives in Shamayim. Ki hatevas ba'atzman, because the words themselves, po'alin kedushas lamala, they work. They arrive in the place where they have to arrive in Shamayim by the kisei hakavod. Masha'ein onu mispalin belaz, which wouldn't happen if you daven in a foreign language. You have to daven in Hebrew. That's a remarkable text that we have here. What the Chofetz Chaim is telling us is the words of the Siddur that we have are unbelievably precious. It's the most precious heirloom that we have. The words that we say Ato Giba Hashem Mechalka Chaim Bechesed. The words that we say in the Tefillah are the words of prophecy of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. You'll turn around to me and say to me, but we have different nusachos. We have Nusach Sfard, Nusach Teimani, Eidat Mizrach, Eshkenaz, all the different texts. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. This is the Masorah by the Eshkenaz. This is the tradition that we have by the Eidos HaMizrach, by Sfardim, by Hasidim. There are different texts, as we know. But one thing is for sure, the text that we have from the Siddur of whatever Nusach you daven is Kodesh Kadoshim. It has tremendous power. It's a tremendous prophecy which was written by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And according to what the Chofetz Chaim is telling us, it works. It goes up to Shamayim and has a tremendous effect. Reb Chaim Volozhin, the great Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, in Nefesh HaChaim, Shar Beis, Perek Yud Gimel, explains as follows. We must understand and value what is the value of the Siddur that we have in the following way. Meaning the Siddur was written over 1,000 years ago. How can it possibly be that the text that they used 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago is still relevant today in 2024? Who says that it would work? Who says that these words are powerful? What is the basis that we have? Maybe the words are archaic. Maybe the words aren't relevant to our times that we have. Says Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, no, that's not the case. The case is that these words that we have were good then, and that's the power of the prophecy, which is a phenomenal prophecy. These are the words which count, and these are the words which will get to Shamayim. Meaning, there's the catalyst. The catalyst is these words that we say. That's a remarkable prophecy. And he gives a following mashal, something like a ball, that the ball has to turn so many resolutions until it reaches its target. Meaning the world has to turn from the status of Golus, meaning the Churban Beis HaMikdash, go through the thousands of years, I think we're up to 1948, until the times that we're up to, and the world keeps on turning and turning through the power of Tefilla until we reach the point of the Gula Shalema, meaning it works through the power of prayer. Prayer turns the world around. If you imagine the world keeps on turning one resolution to another, and each day is important to the next day. Therefore, how can it possibly work? The answer is for an individual and for a community as well, and for all of Klal Yisrael. The conditions are not the same from one day to the next. The conditions of Klal Yisrael last year are completely different. The conditions now that we're in a war in Gaza. We have people who are hostages and people who are sick and soldiers standing on the front. It's not the same as it was last year. But nevertheless, the prophecy works, and the text of the Siddur is all powerful. It was relevant then, and it's relevant today, and it will still be relevant. The world turns along and turns around through the power of prayer, and every prayer, even though it's the same, and that's what the great comment of Rav Dessler, he writes in Michtav Meliyahu, the great challenge of prayer is to keep on saying the same words, but have a passion and have an intention when you say the words. Meaning, even though the times are different, and even though the conditions are different, the prayer is active, and the prayer is dominant, and the prayer determines exactly our conditions at the time. A remarkable prophecy. Whether it's for an individual, your conditions are different 10 years ago from what you're in now. Your status is different. But nevertheless, these are the words which will bring you to a situation for an individual, for Geula, and also for all of Klal Yisrael. And that's the nature of which we have the prayer. And that's the meaning of the word Unashal Mafoim Sefosenu, which the Navi says. Our lips should be instead of the bulls. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the relevant service was bringing a sacrifice. As we know, the sacrifice was bought. In our times, the lips are all powerful, meaning the lips are instead of the bulls. The relevance in the time of the Beis HaMikdash was a sacrifice. The relevance in our times is the power of prayer. I remember reading in a Maimah, one of the Ma'amorim of the great Mashiach of the Mir Yeshiva, Rabbi Alpren, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he explained as follows. In reality, the power of prayer is even greater than sacrifices. In order to bring a sacrifice, you must go to Yerushalayim to the Beis HaMikdash. You need a kohen, you need a certain avodah, you need certain people to help you. But you can be standing on a skyscraper in Tokyo, you can be standing on a boat in the Mediterranean, you can be standing anywhere, you can be a basement in Chicago, wherever you are. You don't need to be in the Beis HaMikdash. You don't need a kohen, you can act it by yourself. You can say the words by yourself. Tefilla is even greater, perhaps says Rabbi Alpren, than a korban. A korban is very limited. You cannot bring a korban if you do something willful, if you do something on purpose. Masha'en came by Tefillah. Tefillah is not like that. Tefillah will work even if a person does an aveira, a transgression willfully. Nevertheless, the prayer will work. And there we see the power of prayer is phenomenal. And the nature of prayer is relevant for all times. And that's the power of the prophecy. That, Rabbi say, is the meaning of the catalyst. The catalyst was created by Anshe Knesset Agdola and is relevant then, and that will make the change from the cauldron of human hegemony into the times of recognizing the Almighty. That is the power of prayer that we have. Power of prayer will turn the world over from that situation into another situation. That's the enormous power that we recognize inside the prayer. And therefore, when we come to daven, we have to recognize this is our catalyst. This will cause the change. There is an interesting halacha which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch also. What happens if a person misses a prayer? Supposing you miss davening Shachris in the morning, you can daven Mincha twice. But it's interesting to note the first time, if at Mincha you miss Shachris and you're davening 2 Minchas, the first prayer that you say, Shemini Esrei, will be Mincha. The second one is also a Mincha. It's Mincha twice. It's not that you daven Shachris after Mincha. The first one is not Shachris. When you're davening Mincha twice, the first one is called Mincha, and the second is called a Hashlama. We give you a makeup, but you can only make it up at the next time. You can't make up Shachris at Ma'ariv. You missed it already. It's gone. We give you a reserve opportunity when it comes to the second Shemoneh Esrei, but it's only called a Hashlama. The Hashlama means, but the first Shachris is gone. You can daven Mincha twice, but you can never make it up. Me'uvas la yuchal liskoyin, chisoron la yuchal amad. You can't make it up. It's gone already. The tefillah has gone. The conditions have changed. The world has changed. You have changed. And your tefillah is quite different from one to the other. And that's the nature of the prayer. I mean, that only gives greater support to what we're saying here. The relevance of the prayer is at this time. Tomorrow morning when you daven Shachris at 8 o'clock in the morning, you daven your Shachris. That is you in your situation, in your circumstances, in your environment, with the situation that you're in. And the words work then at that time, which is a remarkable prophecy here. It worked 500 years ago. And that is the nature, what the Chafetz Chaim means when he says that they sat there and debated every single letter. It will work that way. You say the words Machalka Chaim B'Chesed, it worked 500 years ago, it will work now. And that's the catalyst which is in operation, which is a phenomenal point which we must make here. And that's where the catalyst comes in. It doesn't work naturally. It's not like growing old. It's not like changing from day into night. It's something quite supernatural here. And that is the nature of the prophecy of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. And that's the value of the catalyst that we're talking about here. The Mesilas Yesharim brings down in Perek 19, Perek Yud Tes, but a person might turn around and say, Umi ani umo ani, but who am I? What can I possibly contribute to the nature of change from the Golus from exile into redemption? Who am I? Who am I to make any change? After all, if it never worked in the times of the Vilna Gaon, if it never worked in the time of the Rambam, if it didn't work in the time of Rashi, why on earth should my prayer be in any way significant? Which is a very powerful question. Who am I to make any contribution to this? And that's a very powerful claim. Surely my prayer isn't very valuable. Surely my prayer will not make any catalyst at all and can't make a change. And for that we have to answer really from the beautiful writings of Rabbi Chaim Friedlander in Sifsei Chaim. Sifsei Chaim, he explains it in a beautiful way in the chapter in, I think it's Moadim, page Shin Yud Gimel, if I can remember correctly. Rabbi Chaim Friedlander explains as follows. We have to understand, each person in his time has a purpose in life, in the world. The Ribono Shel Olam, the Almighty, created each one of us in our time, in our family, in our circumstances, in our whatever location we're in, with such circumstances of life, in this marriage, in this particular, in order to fulfill a certain purpose. And that is the nature. My prayer, in my particular situation, I have a contribution to make. Each individual is part of this resolution which makes the world turn around. I in my position here, your position, wherever you are, each person has something to contribute. And a person can never turn, Umiyani, who am I as an individual? It's not true. Each person has a tremendous role to play, and that's the greatness, and that's the meaning perhaps of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. We're all in it together, and everybody has a major contribution to make. Just a little answer to the question as well, maybe the beautiful story told of Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. He was once standing outside his yeshiva on the east side in New York, and someone came up to him and asked him the following question: Rebbe, how can we possibly expect that the Mashiach should come in our times if he never came in the time of Rashi and the came of the Rambam, as I mentioned? How can he possibly come in our time? And but Moshe turned around and said, please look up and peer up at all the skyscrapers. Please tell me, how did these people in the penthouse get there? And the answer is because of all the floors underneath. Meaning you have all the floors underneath. You only get to the penthouse because the floors underneath. Said Rav Moshe, that is the nature of it. We rely and we are completely dependent on the prayers of Rashi and the Rambam and the Chafetz Chaim and Rabbi Akiva Eiger and the Vilna, all these great Rebbes as well. They are the floors underneath. We are on the top floor, meaning if the Mashiach comes in our time, we are completely dependent. Like the person in the penthouse is completely dependent on the floors underneath, so also our prayers are and dependent on all the people, the generations before us. And from there we will arrive. The world will turn around in the resolution, as Rabbi Alpren said, it will move on from the situation of exile into the situation of Geula through the koach of prayer. Each person's prayer is relevant and powerful from there. If that is the point, if that's what we're suggesting here, what we must now understand is, how does the catalyst actually work? What is the nature of the catalyst? What is the, let's bring some evidence and understand how the prayer actually works. For that, Rabbi Isai, I would suggest you need something called haskalah, great enlightenment. You need chokhmah and wisdom, and yediyah and havana and discernment to understand. What I'm about to bring to you are case studies to prove to you that the nature of prayer is the catalyst that we're using. For this, you must also use the pasuk in pasuk Zachoya Moisolam. Please remember the generations of history and our ancestry that we come back from. Please remember what happened in previous time. Zachoya Moisolam. Have understanding, be enlightened, be wise, and have insight, and discern from previous times exactly what happened in order to recognize what the power of the prayer is. And that's the nature of the catalyst, which I'd like to examine by certain case studies. But let's begin maybe with the beautiful Gemara in Sukkah. And the Gemara explains that Tesvav in the Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara says as follows: Lama nimshilu tfilosin shel tzadikim la'atar. Why are the prayers of tzadikim, of righteous people, compared to an atar? An ayin tofresh is a pitchfork. An ayin is a pitchfork. Says the Gemara, the farmer goes down into the field as a moshul, and he sees that the wheat on top is dry and the wheat underneath is wet. He takes a pitchfork and flips it over and turns it over. Meaning, the nature of prayer is an atar. It turns over a situation. Yitzhak and Rivka could not have children, and Yitzhak davened vayeta. He turned over the situation. She was originally called a woman who couldn't have children. The next Vatah Rivka, she suddenly conceived and she became pregnant. Meaning, it turned over vayeta. The pitchfork turns over the situation from one situation to another situation. That's the nature of prayer, and therefore the Tefilla of tzaddikim has the power to turn around a situation. And that's what we must understand and appreciate. The catalyst causes a change. It's not a natural change. We need that in order to make this enormous momentous change from the world that we know it, from the cauldron of human hegemony, to turn into V'hai Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. We need a very powerful catalyst. We need a very powerful pitchfork, and that's what prayer is, and that's what Chaim Belozhin, Chaim Vital had mentioned at the beginning when we mentioned. In our times, you're right, in the previous times Torah was so relevant. In our times, it's the power of prayer, and the power of prayer will turn over a situation. I remember reading in the Mamorim of the great Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, Zecher Tzadik Yivroch, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir, at the time of the Yom Kippur War. He mentioned at that time tremendous words of enlightenment and inspiration to the Talmidim in the Mir Yeshiva. It's written at the back of Sichas Musa. One of the points which Reb Chaim mentions is as follows. If you look carefully in the war of Midian, which Klal Yisrael had in the Midbar, Moshe Rabbeinu selected 1,000 soldiers from each tribe, meaning altogether there were 12,000 soldiers. He then selected another 1,000 from each tribe, meaning 12,000 who would go into war and 12,000 who would remain in the camp. Says Reb Chaim as follows: the purpose of choosing the first 12 was to go out to the battle. The second 12,000, 1,000 from each, stayed in the camp and davened. Each chayal, each soldier, had someone davening from him, from his tribe. It wasn't just a matter of going out and fighting to war, but the power of the prayer behind caused the success of the soldiers when they went into battle. That's a phenomenal point here, which we're making here. The power of the prayer of those inside the machane were the ones who prepared and made the success of the soldiers who went out to battle, and that's the catalyst. There you see it, right? That's the Choyam Oisolam. Look what happened in the history here in the Battle of Midian. Maybe we can go even further back. Let's go back to the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is really last week's Parsha and the Parshas of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Let me remind you of this beautiful passage at the beginning of the end of Perek Beis in Shemais, in Parshas Shemais, where the pasuk says as follows: "Vayi bayomim harabim hahem." It was in the times when the service and the servitude and the persecution in Egypt was awful. It was horrendous. Vayomas melech Yisrael vayonchu bnei Yisrael, and they mourned and they cried and they groaned, Klal Yisrael. Vayizaku, and they cried out in prayer. Look at the words, Batal Shavosam, and their prayer went up, El Elokim, Vayishma Elokim, and the Almighty heard their prayer, Vayizkar, and he remembered the bris as Avraham, Yitzchak, Vayar Elokim, Vayeda Elokim, and the next verse is talking about Moshe at the burning bush. There you have the catalyst. The avodah was horrendous. The service was terrible. They had no way of redemption at all. They cried out to the Almighty, and because of the prayer, they were answered. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembered the bris by Avraham Avinu, Vayeda Elokim, Moshe's at the snare, and Moshe's chosen to be the Mashiach. There you see it. You see it quite clearly. Look carefully at the time of Leil HaSeder, the night of the 15th of Nisan, Klal Yisrael and Mitzrayim. All of Klal Yisrael were about to go out into the Gula, but they were all singing Hallel. Hallelu Avdei Hashem B'Lavdei Paro. Paro was running around the streets with his daughter Basia, searching for Moshe and Aaron, and all of Klal Yisrael were singing the Geula, singing Hallel there inside their homes, when all the firstborns were dying. An unbelievable scene. At the time of the Geula, they were davening. That's the point. They were singing Hallel at the time. They came to the Yam Suf, and they saw the 600 chariots behind them, all the armies of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas all behind them, and they turned out and they cried. Vayizaku Elakim. Says Rashi, Topsu Nos Hoysam. When they stood and they cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then the sea opened up. You see it quite clearly. The catalyst was in action straight away. By the Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu stood in front of the Almighty and said, Ribbono shel Olam, Vayechal Elokim, and he was shown the 13 midas of Rachamim. Vayema Hashem Salachti Kibbarecha. Through what? The power of prayer. We must recognize these points. We must register them inside our mind and write them in our thoughts, because this is where the catalyst, you see it coming out in. You must remember these points. If you don't have that, you don't have the discernment, you don't have the chokhmah, you don't have the haskalah to understand what is the history of Klal Yisrael. This is the history of Klal Yisrael. Look at the period of Shoftim. There's a beautiful section in Shoftim, I think it's Perek Vav, of Gideon. Klal Yisrael again being oppressed enormously by Midian. And Gideon turned around and said, a malach came and spoke to him, and Gideon turned around and said as follows. Listen to these words of prayer. He said as follows. Rashi mentions it. I think it's Perek Vav, Posuk Yud Beis, I think it is, in Shoftim. Gideon turned around and said as follows. If they in Mitzrayim were greater than we are in our times, then surely the Almighty can save us in their merit of those people who came out of Mitzrayim. But if we ourselves are greater than the people who came out of Mitzrayim, if that's what you did to them in Mitzrayim, then surely we must be privileged to even greater, in at least that level of redemption. And the Rebbeinu then said, Lech b'kochacha zu, lo, go, in that what you just said, V'hushata es Yisrael, says the Apostle, you just saved Klal Yisrael. That sort of prayer. Either way, either they were greater and we're saved in their merit, or we are greater, and therefore, certainly if they receive that sort of attention and that sort of redemption from Egypt, then certainly we must be privileged to that. It's an incredible prayer here. So either come what may, in that what you just said, Gideon, said the Apostle, you just saved Klal Yisrael. That sort of prayer that you mentioned. Remember by Shimshon standing there with all the Plishtim inside the big temple, and he prayed to the Almighty, let me first have Nekama against these Mitzrayim Plishtim before they kill me. And he prayed to the Almighty, and the prayer came up, and the walls collapsed, and he had strength again. The power of prayer, you see it coming out all the time. Let's go to the famous lady, really, I suppose, the Aim Tefilla, the mother of all prayer, and that's Chana. And the beautiful words which we say about Chana. Chana standing there in the Mishkan in Shiloh, Vatispalel al Hashem. Not El Hashem, but al Hashem. Say the Mefarshim, what do you mean you daven on Hashem? She davened for and on behalf of the Almighty, which is a very powerful prayer. She didn't daven to him, she davened for him. Meaning, Ribbono shel Olam, if I have a child, I will give him over to the Almighty and serve you, which was the child of Shmuel. That was the power of her prayer. Al Hashem. She davened for and on behalf. This is for you. It's a very powerful level of prayer. We always daven to the Almighty. Maybe on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that's the enormous pestry on Rosh Hashanah. Our prayers are such a high level. We daven for HaKadosh. We daven for Him, which is a very high level of prayer. Anshe Knesset Agdola only gave us such a high level of prayer on Rosh Hashanah, on such a day. The rest of the time we ask Hashem, Shema Koleinu, V'fo'einu, we ask for our requests. But to ask for and on His behalf is a very high level of prayer. That is the nature of Hannah's prayer. That's the catalyst. And Hannah became pregnant, had a child, and she had a child after she had Shmuel afterwards. You see the point. If you ever read through the book Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Beis, you see all the incredible stories and episodes during the life of David HaMelech. What you merely must do is when you read through Shmuel, hold next to you a Sefer Tehillim. And very often you'll see in the commentaries of the Radak, and maybe in the Meiri as well, at certain scenes inside David HaMelech, you see the prayer in Tehillim. Continually, all of Sefer Tehillim is really a record of the prayers which David HaMelech said, King David said, at the time of different situations. When he was running away from from Absalom, that's at the beginning of the Tehillim. You see also Kuf Mem Beis, the time when he was inside the cave, when Shaul was pursuing him. All these different situations, every time David made a prayer. It wasn't just he was successful as a great general in the army and had, I think, 19 battles, and everyone who was successful. You see the prayer which is going on all the time. I think it's Mem Daled, which is the prayer when he faced Anshe Ke'ilah. Every time in every situation, David turned and prayed. And that's the relevance of Sefer Tehillim to Sefer Shmuel. If you can ever make the match, you grow tremendously. You realize what type of person David HaMelech was. Maybe that's why it says, Vahi David, L'chol Dorochav Maskil, V'Hashem Imoi. The reason why the Almighty was with him, because every time he made a prayer, and every time in every situation, you see it all the time coming through. Kof Gimel, Mitzvah, Hashem Roi Lo Echsa, Hashem is my shepherd, I will not fear. That was when he was in a place called the Forest of Clay, when he was running away from Shaul. Every time he made a prayer which went together with it. And there's the catalyst in action. We brought Midian, we brought Yesias Mitzrayim, we saw from Gidon, we saw from Shimshon, we saw from Chana. That's the Choya Moisailam. That's recognizing what happened in the history of Klal Yisrael. I suppose one of the most significant periods which we see the catalyst in action maybe is Esther in Purim, in Shushan. You remember the Gezerah which Haman had said, Lahashmid, Laharoig, Ula'abed es kol HaYehudim. There were 4 gezerahs which Haman had said. Lahashmid is to take away the spiritual essence of Klal Yisrael. Hashmada. A person is gishmad means he loses his neshama. Lahashmid. Laharoig is the ruach chaim, says the Vilna Gaon. La'abeid is lo aleinu, like they did in Auschwitz, the burning the guf, the burning the crematorium which they had, to burn the guf. Ushlolam lavos, and take all their property. That was an awful, awful situation of a Holocaust here, the early Holocaust by Haman, to take away the spiritual side, lahashmig, the ruach chaim, which is la'aroig, la'abeid is to burn the bodies, and to take all their properties. That was the gezerah, that was the order of the Holocaust against Klal Yisrael. Mordechai and Esther turned around and said, Leich kanoisis kol HaYehudim, gather all the Jews together, and then you find at the end of the Megillah in Perek Tes, LaYehudim hoisa oira, B'simcha, b'sosa, and b'yikor. Oira is on the guf. The guf was enlightened. Simcha is the ruach. Simcha's beis hashoeva is the singing. Sosain is in the neshama, which is higher than simcha. V'yokar is the clothes of malchus, which Mordechai wore. Unbelievable passages here. It turned around completely. There you see the catalyst from lahashmig la'aroi gula'abeid la'hiudim oisa oira b'simcha. It turns around completely. What was the pinnacle? What was the focus? In the middle you have the prayer of Mordechai and Esther. What made the change from the Gezerah of Haman into turning it into the happiest day in the calendar, from the day of a Holocaust to the happiest day in the Jewish calendar? The power of prayer in the middle. That's the nature of it. You see it all in action. And therefore we must learn from this. We must pick up the points. We must understand, and really that's the situation which we're in now. Really, I suppose, the government and the media, which we're facing here at the moment in Israel, don't know these points. And that's the tragedy here. They don't realize the destiny of Klal Yisrael. It's not dependent on military might, like you have, for example, in Vietnam, or in situations in Ukraine, or situations of Saddam Hussein. It's different here. The destiny of Klal Yisrael did not depend on military might, how many missiles you have, and how much weapons you have, or how many drones you have. And maybe that's where they're missing the point. That's the tragedy here. What we have to realize is this: there's a catalyst of Klal Yisrael. The destiny of Klal Yisrael does not depend on the level of munitions and the military might. It depends on the koyach of Tefilla, and there's a choya moisa, and that's the point here. And there you see the catalyst in action. Let's come back again to Kuf Kaf Daled. Nafshenu ketzipa nimnata. Our lives are like a bird caught in a trap. Hapach nishpa. The trap will snap. And we will be saved. In Perek 124. Ezreinu b'shem Hashem oiseh shamayim. That's the koyach of Tefillah. And that's what we have to realize here. And that's really the nature of the catalyst. That's really what Reb Chaim Vital had meant when he said, in our times, it's not so much Torah. Of course, Talmud Torah is keneged kulam. Of course it is. Of course it's preeminent. preeminent. It's the most important mitzvah. But in our times, the mitzvahs hayom, like on Rosh Hashanah is shofar, on Leil HaSeder is the Haggadah and Matzah, the mitzvahs hayom of now times is the nature of prayer. And that will cause the enormous change. It's not a natural change. The change is something which will happen supernaturally. And you have to bring the catalyst in. And that's the power of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah of the Siddur. The Nusach is preeminent. Our lips are instead of the bulls. How can you say that? It was written nearly 2,000 years ago. Yeah, but it's relevant. The prophecy is so powerful. It's an unbelievable point to recognize here. To realize the power of the prophecy, and that's when you pick up a Siddur, be very careful with the words. Say the words with articulation. Say the words with a passion. Say them coherently and eloquently. Say the words clearly. And that's the power which we have. The power of the prayer. The catalyst works. That's what we learn from Chemes Midian. That's what we learn from Mitzrayim. And the whole history of our nation is like that. Our destiny is quite different. It's not dependent on military might. It's not like Dunkirk. It's not like the Second World War. How much might you have? How many guns you have? No, we're not like that. And that's what they're missing in the Memshala and the media. I'm suggesting it's a tragedy because they don't realize that. I think even the present Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu's father, I think was a great historian. Maybe his father would have been able to tell him that. The history of Klal Yisrael is not wrapped up in military might, in the wisdom and the strategy of war. Of course, they make a hishtadlus. I'm not denying the power of the army, but behind it all is the koyach of prayer, which we must recognize. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu taught Klal Yisrael by taking the 12,000 soldiers and 12,000 who remained in the camps. And that is the point which Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz had brought out, which is such a powerful point. Those people who went out to war were backed up by each person had a person in behind the camp who was davening for him. And that really, I'm suggesting, is our role as bystanders. We are standing at the back here. We're not involved in the war. We're people who are sitting in our homes wherever we are in Chutz Noitz and Eretz Yisrael. We're not involved with them. But surely our mission must be, that's the Goy Kodesh and the Memleches Koyanim coming out. The Goy Kodesh is the relationship between man and the Almighty, and the Ichpatiut, the B'nai Talbus, the refined nature of Klal Yisrael, to be able to stand there and care for other people, the Avelim, the Cholim, the soldiers, and the hostages to daven for them. That surely, Rabbi Yisrael, is our greatest mitzvah we have now, and that's the catalyst which we have in action. I'd like to end, since we're now in the period of the Shloshim, of the great Mashiach, Hagon Rav Matisyahu Salomon, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I'd like to end with a moshel which Rav Matisyahu had given, I remember hearing several years ago in Haunof, in the Boston Shul. It was a wonderful moshel of Rav Matisyahu. I like to say it over in his Zchut Sayog Aleinu, but I think the point which he's making is so profound to the points which we've just been mentioning now. The greatness of what Matisyahu had said, I think, it really is the simplicity of his moshel that he brought out. It shows that the man, he was, Rosh Hashanah, his head was in Shamayim, but he was Mutzav Outza. He understood how people worked. But Matisyahu could give a phenomenal share of the depth of Torah, but he could also talk in a common way, in a normal way. He understood people on a basic level, and he brought this following Maisa to give tremendous chizuk to the power of prayer. And I think that's the point which we can bring out from this Maisa. It's a beautiful moshel of a Matisyahu, which I heard personally myself several years ago. He said as follows: if you know, in England, the Queen of England, he was talking when the Queen was around, now there's a king, but let's talk about the Queen and the time of the Queen. The Queen holds every single year several garden parties in her garden in Buckingham Palace. And every year she makes a certain list and invites certain people. It's a tremendous honour in England to be invited to the Queen's garden party in Buckingham Palace during the summer. And people come in and they mingle and talk around, and you meet the Queen in her garden. And I suppose when Matisyahu portrayed it in a beautiful way, in his phenomenal way he brought it out, he says, supposing a person is sitting in his house and the mailman comes and he delivers a letter, and you look at the envelope and it sees the royal stamp on the back, and you suddenly think to yourself, goodness me, I know that stamp. It's from the from Buckingham Palace. You open it up, and believe it or not, it's an invitation which has come from Her Majesty the Queen, and he's asking you to come to the garden party. And it's they sit at the table, and the husband and wife turn around, and the uncle Cohen turns around and says to wife Leah, look, Leah, we've been invited by Her Majesty. So she turns around to him and says, yes, this is how Matisyahu built it up. Yeah, you must go to Harrods and buy yourself a new suit, if those people who don't know what Howard's is a phenomenal, prestigious department store in England, in London, in Kensington. And people go to Howard's and they buy a new suit and a new tie, and she buys herself a new outfit, and Matthew built it up, and you make a tremendous fuss, and eventually you turn up at the door, and it's in the afternoon, at 2:00 in the afternoon, let's say in the middle of May, and you stand outside there at Buckingham Palace, and the man in the big Streimel and the big back Streimel stands there, what is your name, please? And he says, my name is Yankel Cohen, and this is my wife Leah. Oh yes, Mr. Cohen, you're expected. And the guard lets you in, and you walk around, and you see hundreds of people walking around the garden. And as you're walking around, they're serving sandwiches, and Matthew built up the mosh in a beautiful way. You're walking around the garden. All of a sudden, you see in the corner of your eye, the other end of the corner, you see Her Majesty the Queen standing there. And you move over to her. And you move over to Her Majesty the Queen, and you mingle with her, and maybe she turns around and she says to you, hello, good afternoon, how are you, and who are you? And you talk to her for a minute, and maybe she even talks to you, maybe she even shakes your hand, I don't know, but you have a certain conversation with Her Majesty the Queen. And this goes on for about 2 hours. And Matthew built it up in a beautiful way. And then, after about 2 hours, one of the guards comes around with the bell, and he rings the bell, and you have to leave. And after 2 hours, you have to leave and you go out of the garden. And that's the end of the garden party. You come out and you sit down next a few years at the Shabbos table, and people at your Shabbos table, and you turn around and say, yes, I was at the Queen's garden. At the Queen's garden party, and everybody gets very excited about it. And what did you see there? What did the Queen wear? And how did she look? And you talk about this, and this is what the Queen said to me. And you go on, and it's something to talk about. It's a wonderful topic of conversation, maybe at the Shabbos table. You talk about what happened at the Queen's garden party. And then Matthew brought out the following point, which is a beautiful point. You should know, as far as you're concerned, everything that you said and did, you remember every single word that you said and everything that you did in that 2 hours inside Buckingham Palace and the garden party. But one thing you should know for sure, she will not remember one thing about you, who you are, what your name is, what she said to you. There's no possible chance that she will remember what she said to you or what was done in the party. You will remember everything, but there's no possibility whatsoever that Her Majesty the Queen said will remember anything about you at all. It's not relevant at all. And here's the point which he brought out, which is a beautiful point. When you stand in front of the Almighty and you talk to Him and you say, Mechalka Chaim B'Chesed, you might well probably forget everything that you said. 10 years ago you davened a certain Shema Esrei, you will not remember it. But the Almighty remembers every single thing that you said. He will remember every word that you said and every articulation, every element of word of coherence and eloquence that you said. You will forget completely a prayer that you said 20 years ago. Ki ato shomer, and He remembers everything. Isn't that what we say on Rosh Hashanah? Ato zoiches kol ma'aseh ein shikcha lifnei kisei kavod. That's an incredible thought. You will forget everything, but the Almighty will forget nothing. Her Majesty lahabdil elef hatoros will forget everything. You will remember everything, and that's a beautiful point. When you turn and talk to the Almighty, you should know you might forget, but He will not forget anything. Ato zoiches kol ma'aseh adam. He remembers everything. Ein shikcha, nothing is forgotten. Do you remember that you stood, 30 years ago, and you stood on Rosh Hashanah and you davened with great kavanah? You don't remember that. He remembers it, and that's a beautiful point to remember. When a person can turn around this, mi ani or mo ani, like the Mesilas Yesharim said, who am I to talk to the Almighty and pray for Klal Yisrael? He remembers it. He remembers everything you said. Such a beautiful, beautiful nimshal here. Her Majesty will forget everything, but the Rimon Shalom forgets nothing. You will forget everything that you did, but He doesn't forget a word at all. And that's the enormous enthusiasm, I think, inspiration you can take from it. What a beautiful mashal from Matthew Solomon, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. There's the message. Don't give up. Every time that you say Shir Eso Einay Horim, every time you say Mir Mamakim, Arachenu B'nei Yisrael, Hanasun Batzor, everything is remembered. Everything has a point. Nothing is forgotten by the Almighty. Every effort, every word that is said. And if it's said with articulation, it's said with a passion, it's said coherently, can you imagine the impression you make in Shamayim? And that's the great power of the catalyst that we have. But boys say, we have to be mechazik ourselves with prayer, especially from the beautiful mashal of Matisyo. The catalyst works, it makes an enormous impression. Mitzvah Hashem, next week we'll look at the point of the importance of reaction. But on this week, please remember, the power of the catalyst is tremendous. We must daven for the chayalim, we must daven for the hostages, we must daven for the avelim, and all the people who are separated from their homes. Achenu b'nei Yisrael, hanasunim batzora b'shiva, hamokim yirachim mechem yotziim, mitzora li'avocha, me'afelo lo'ero, mishibe ligula, hashto ba'gola, uvizman koriv, v'noimar omein.